Hello, welcome along. Thank you for joining us today, either in person or online. I hope that our online audience can hear my voice. For those of you who are new, the Martin Center Research Seminar is the research arm of the Department of Architecture at the University of Cambridge. And this is the 55th edition. And in this edition, we are continuing on the themes resilience. So today we are really pleased to host James Delaney, and I'm going to make a brief introduction of him, but uh, mm, certainly we get to know James and his work by the time he gives his lecture. On the just before I forgot, I'm there, and on the format of the seminar, James will speak to us for like 45 minutes to 1 hour, and then we will have 15 to 30 minutes of Q&A. And for those of you online, you can type your questions in the chat box or just raise your hand, and then we unmute you to raise your questions. All right. James is the chairman of the Block by Block Foundation, a non-profit partnership between Inhabited and Microsoft, which uses Minecraft as a community participation tool in urban design, helping youth and disempowered group design and build public space in their own city. James is also the founder of Blockworks, a design studio producing metaverse experience inside video games. James lectures at the Balsas on the history and theory of video games and how it relates to architectural practice. I think this is just for me, and floor is yours.
Great, thanks so much. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, so I mean, maybe as a quick to build on that introduction. Growing up, I was obsessed with Lego, and I think that grew into a real love for world building games like Minecraft, where you're kind of creating universes and digital environments. Alongside that, I was studying architecture here at Cambridge about 10 years ago, and then later at UCL, and really interested in how these two kind of worlds intersected. I think it was obvious to me that video games had a very spatial element, and a lot of what I was learning in architecture also seemed kind of relevant to that world of games. So for this lecture, I'm really aiming to give an overview of the field rather than going too deep into any one of these. But I think maybe broadly, kind of three areas where video games can really be applied to architecture and urbanism. So research, architectural research, but also experimentation, architectural education, gamifying practice. So how can we bring games alongside traditional or existing architectural or urban design practice? And then finally, I think arguing for architects making games as architectural practice. So environments that exist only digitally, these being kind of valid and important as sites of architectural practice. Maybe to start with, 10, 15 minutes, I hope this isn't too boring, on a brief history of video games, because I think it's useful to have that context, and it's quite an interesting history. For today, I'm going to be defining games as the following. I mean, there are various kind of the boundaries of what a game is quite blurred now, but from a purely technical point of view, what we can say is a video game is a combination of software, an electronic game that has been designed or coded by someone, the interface, how you're controlling or interacting with that software, the operator, so us as gamers, as humans, and then finally the video device, the screen, mobile phone, whatever it is that you're playing the game on. So the first games, I mean, going back to sort of the 40s, were made in science labs, actually. They were not designed as video games. They were more experimentations with sort of available technologies, particularly from military and government research. So arguably the first game is this. It's called the cathode ray tube amusement device. It's sort of based on World War II missile simulators, more of a kind of scientific curiosity. In 10 years on, another candidate for maybe one of the first video games was an American physicist, William Higginbotham. He was working at the Brookhaven National Laboratory. He was a serious physicist. He'd worked on the Manhattan Project. And maybe out of boredom, he sort of discovered that the machine he was working with could simulate trajectories of objects with wind resistance. And this was the basis for a game he made, Tennis for Two. every year, this national laboratory had an open exhibition. They opened for 3 days. The public could come in, and he thought this would be fun to do for that. And it was played on an oscilloscope, if you remember those from school. But it's important to note here that really the first decade and a half of video games is taking place in government institutions, research laboratories, usually coming off kind of military technology, with games being more of an experiment rather than with any kind of entertainment purpose in mind. And essentially, these games are produced by scientists having fun, playing around, testing the limits of the technology. There's a games writer, Ian Bogost, who kind of makes the point that early video games are countercultural. So these scientists are trying to sort of liberate government research computers from a purely military or purely academic use, which is quite interesting. But by the 70s, we have something that's more recognizable as video games. We have the first console that you could buy and play a game at home, the Magnavox Odyssey. And you have Pong by Atari, which is sort of a development of Tennis for Two, but a little bit more human-friendly. Firstly in arcades, and a few years later, you could play it at home. By the late 70s, you've actually got market competition. You've got Atari, Midway, who made Space Invaders. And Space Invaders kicks off really the first golden age of gaming, which is actually in arcades. So Space Invaders was the first game that displayed and recorded a high score. So you now get the idea of competition. We think of esports as quite a modern thing, but you can see here in the 1980s, you've got halls full of people playing Space Invaders, national championships. And so competitive gaming was already a thing. Towards the 80s, we've got Color. We've got Pac-Man, produced by Namco and imported to the US by Midway. And here we start to see a full-scale commercialization of video games. So licensing opportunities, there was a Pac-Man song on the charts, TV show merchandise, video games really becoming part of mainstream pop culture. In 1 year in the 80s, Pac-Man made $1 billion in quarters just in arcades, $1 plays. So people are starting to kind of smell the commercial potential of the field. And just a year later, 1981, Nintendo comes out with Donkey Kong, the first game with a narrative or a storyline of a sort. I mean, narrative is now super important in all video games. You have very complex storytelling with, combining cinema techniques, cutscenes, voiceover characters, all this kind of thing. By the 80s, there's a huge rise in personal computer ownership. People are starting to have computers at home. You had quite game-friendly computers like the Commodore 64. And new programming languages, which actually allow people to start programming or modifying their own games. And this kind of builds up to a slight crisis in the industry where you have an overproduction of quite poor quality games and underpowered hardware. I think the E.T. game that you can see there, which was programmed to come out alongside Spielberg's film, was a bit of a disaster. And some of those early video game companies start to drop out and begin a bit of a decline. But it does recover thanks to Nintendo largely. They have their home entertainment consoles and Mario Brothers, which is, again, it's kind of like a Pac-Man. It's a pop culture icon, huge IP. And this game also has a really strong reward system. You kind of level up and move through these different worlds as you get better at the game. In the 90s, 3 dimensions come into play. So we move away from these 2D platform games and towards 3D polygon techniques. It's also a massive proliferation in quite violent content, and it's interesting whether that comes along with the 3D. But games like Wolfenstein 3D, where you go around sort of massacring Nazis, you have the birth of the FPS, which is the first-person shooter game. But 3D taking over in other games too, sports simulators, those kinds of games. And now in the noughties, you have a super competitive market. You've got the Xbox, Sony's PlayStation, Nintendo's consoles as well. High definition gaming, and really a huge choice of genre. 3D, 2D, role-playing, simulation, puzzle games, role-playing games, so much choice. And it's important to note that all the way through this technological development of games, it's not just been the game companies. You have other actors as well. I'd say the US military massively contributing to the technological advancements that made these games possible. But also kind of state actors looking at maybe the kind of propaganda potentials of games. I mean, Call of Duty there, which was, I think, 2009, Modern Warfare 2. It's a very entertaining game, but I mean, it does depict war crimes and treads a very thin line, I would say, between very serious topics and a complete trivialization of warfare, very problematic cultural representations. These kind of questions start to come into the debate. And now this is where we are today. So very rich cinematic experiences like Elden Ring, which came out last year. We call these AAA games or blockbuster games. They take players literally hundreds of hours to complete. The worlds are so vast that if you were just to walk around and explore every landmark, you'd be there for days. And meanwhile, you have games like Minecraft, which have been out for 15 years and kept the same players coming back to that same game over a decade. So this is where we are now. Games can be played anywhere, anytime, just like the moving image used to be something reserved for a cinema, and then it moved into our living rooms and TVs, and then into our pockets on phones. Gaming has followed the same trajectory. And now a lot of the boundaries of kind of the medium of video games are quite blurred. Just to give a sense of scale, because it's quite difficult to grasp, but this year global gaming revenues are set to be about $300 billion. These are impossible numbers to visualize, but for some perspective, if we take 2022, for instance, gaming earned about $235 billion. In the same year, the movie industry generated just $26 billion. The global film industry was also about the same. And so 3 years ago, the profitability of gaming was more than all of music, film, TV, Netflix, Taylor Swift combined, and it's frankly not even close. So I think people don't often appreciate how large the market is. At the moment, about 3.3 billion people sort of play games regularly, would classify themselves as gamers. In the UK, it's a bit more. So by 2027, we anticipate about 70% of the UK population will be playing games regularly. And this is, I think, relevant to us because the amount of resources that are going into the development of virtual environments far exceed any other industry. So the world's best digital design tools, the best visualization, software, graphics engines, devices, this is all sitting within video games, which is not often appreciated. Some of the big firms, Foster's, Gensler, Zaha Hadid, Arup, they're all using game engines now to design a lot of their projects. The creator of Fortnite, Epic Games, have Unreal Engine, and this is now quite a common workflow or software for large architecture firms. I think there's also a strong case for students actually learning these tools rather than just CAD, but we can discuss that. So what does the future of video games look like? I mean, it's hard to predict because it's so tied to technology, which is very fast moving and can go in unexpected directions. But maybe some obvious kind of guesses would be virtual mixed and augmented reality, these kind of headsets, which can overlay games onto the environment we see around us. This leads into what we call street games or pervasive games like Pokemon Go, where you're playing a game literally in the street, and it's geo-located and the game is tied to real locations. The use of artificial intelligence to generate games and game narratives. ProcGen, which is procedural generation. Games like Minecraft can generate seemingly infinite worlds that are kind of generating according to algorithms. Smart brain games. So something that's being looked at now is how we might be able to control characters within video games through our brains, through our kind of neurological impulses, our emotions, our thoughts. And then finally, the metaverse, which is really too big a topic to get into, but maybe a quick way of describing it is a unifying digital existence. If you think of the internet and make that 3D, this is a digital plane where you do everything from watching Netflix to shopping to socializing to gaming, all happening in one connected virtual world with potentially billions of users. That doesn't exist, and I think it's hopeful to say that that's going to happen in the next few decades. But by far the closest thing we have to that is video games, and the technology that we need to make this is all in the video game industry. Okay, so after that quick introduction, maybe we can look first at video games as research. So a platform for architectural research, urban investigations, but also experimentation, education. This is the basis for the course that I teach at the Bartlett, which is a master's in cinematic and video game architecture. And we're really engaging with this emerging field of game designers, architects, theorists, looking at the research potential of games. The image on the screen is a drawing from two of our course tutors, Luke and Sandra. They have a studio, UMP, and they made a series of drawings mapping the routes that players can take in Assassin's Creed, which is a famous game which kind of recreates real landmarks and real cities historically, in this case, Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's an interesting one. So in the same game, Assassin's Creed Unity, there was a false story in the press maybe 3-4 years ago, claiming that in the reconstruction of Notre Dame after the fire in 2019, they were using this video game as a basis for the remodeling. It's just not true. As you'd expect, there are far more detailed sort of laser millimeter scans of it. But the game's version is so detailed and so lifelike that this story was not really questioned and quite plausible. And I think for a player who's never visited the real cathedral or is really into architectural history, you could be forgiven for thinking this is a simulation exactly of the real thing, when in fact it's been kind of modified significantly to actually make it into a building that you can traverse and kind of climb in interesting ways, and distort it essentially. Following on from that, we have a later Assassin's Creed game, one of the most recent ones, which shows the 9th century city of Baghdad from the Golden Age of Islam. And the game developers, Ubisoft, were so confident in the accuracy of this that they actually released an educational version to the market. So if you're in school, you can take your students around 9th century Baghdad and see all the landmarks and talk to the architects. And whilst I think it's a good thing that gaming can engage students in history, there is a danger of these games starting to rewrite architectural history and actually change the public imaginary or perception of what certain cultures or what certain buildings look like, especially when those buildings can no longer be visited. So I think that's something to be studied, particularly in relation to the kind of political context of these environments. I think in some cases, the discrepancy between these real spaces and their virtual facsimiles can be a really interesting space for conversation. Here's where architectural theory and video games can really intersect: the world of utopias, dystopias, heterotopias, third space. All of these ideas find new and interesting meanings in the context of virtual worlds. This game is New York as a sort of post-apocalyptic kind of battlefield. It's Tom Clancy's The Division. And there's a group of Austrian artists. They call themselves a pseudo-Marxist media guerrilla focused on the artistic intervention and appropriation of video games. And they do some interesting projects. This one, they've done what's called the Jane Walk, which is a community-led walking tour through a city. It happens every year on the birthday of Jane Jacobs, which is all about sort of livable cities. And they decided to use this kind of New York wasteland as the site for their own Jane Walk. And I thought I'd play some clips and then we can discuss.
In schools, stores, and theaters, and palatial hotels. A fascinating city, an incredible city. The commercial and cultural heart of a great nation.
Welcome to Operation Jane Walk, a city tour through the architecture of an online shooter game by Robin Klungel and Leonhard Muller. So, New York serves as the stage picture around us. It was recreated in great detail in digital space for the game, making a scenery which consists of facades, background characters, props, whole atmosphere. We're in a narrative skill game, the multiplayer shooter Tom Clancy's The Division. But today we will walk through the battlefield with a peaceful intention and just focus on the city itself. The setting of the game, the story, is in post-apocalyptic New York, a situation of lawlessness, anarchy. These cars around us are dead. The city is standing quite still, a snowy dystopia. New York is under martial law. which can be dangerous for us casual urban explorers. We are just strolling about, but instead of parasols, we carry rifles. Instead of cameras, we look through our scopes. Our first stop on our tour, the Projects, a residential settlement built between 1943 and 1945. An important figure in 20th century urban planning, Le Corbusier, was a revolutionary architect. His vision, all structures need to be replaced. His plan, greatly destroy New York and rebuild it, according to his great vision. Another important figure, Robert Moses, an urbanist from New York, changed the face of the city. He displaced 250,000 people in his plans. He demolished entire quarters. Here, the Gas House District. 11,000 people lost their homes to make way for this new social housing project. This was constructed mainly for war veterans. It was built to combat the housing shortage in the 40s, but also with the intention to renew the so-called spoiled urban fabric. Stuyvesant was originally planned solely for white veterans. So let's continue on to the next project involving Robert Moses, the Franklin D. Roosevelt Drive. Follow me. Listen to Django Reinhardt's version of Your Driving Race. Some more about Robert Moses. No one else in the history of urbanism has built more miles of roads. Moses' vision was to frame Manhattan with big highways, which he succeeded in doing. In the post-war era, the white middle class moved from downtown into the suburbs, feeding urban sprawl. Moses tried to solve congestion, more highways, which accommodate more cars, which ironically led to more traffic. New York became a city of cars. Okay, as we enter this bleak playground setting, see an extra character in the background. He's always here. For a second, watching for a while. Bizarre performance. We don't disturb him. He'll continue his performance forever. Its rhythmic beats make the cadence of this brutalized world. A metronome. Its echo between the houses.
So it goes on for a while like that, but these are just short extracts, but it's quite a humorous take on the sort of hyper reality of these virtual spaces. It's sort of a dystopian Disney world. You have these bizarre performances of characters on endless loops doing the same thing. He talks about sort of how the city's become more walkable, the fact that no one's driving the cars because it's just a battlefield. But yeah, I mean, on the surface, it's sort of an urban exploration, but I think it's quite an interesting critical piece on how these games have been designed. Players enter the game without any moral or ethical dilemma. They simply spawn into New York, and their prime objective is to kill each other with no narrative or context behind that. And so their kind of pacifist walking tour goes against this. They're essentially urban flaneurs, peaceful tourists of a digital world, which is designed to destroy them. So it's quite an unusual example, but it's well done. This is a project I'm working on now with LSE, British Library and Lancaster University, and we're looking to bring Charles Booth's iconic poverty maps into a game environment. So the Booth poverty maps are really a landmark social and economic survey of London from the sort of late 1800s, and they showed that 35% of Londoners were living in abject poverty, which was a huge shock to people. It hadn't really been mapped before. He maps huge areas of the city by doing door-to-door surveys with a team of people, and then he color codes the whole city according to their perceived wealth. So sort of red and yellow as the upper wealthy classes, and dark blue and black as what he calls criminally poor, which is a bit harsh. But yeah, I mean, these maps really deepened processes of social research, ultimately contributing to, the development of the welfare state due to the public awareness and political pressure. So they're important documents, but and LSE own these documents, and they're saying they're just so hard to get non-architects interested or engaged in this topic. So we started by looking at how can we bring the maps into a video game, and we chose Minecraft, and also turn them actually into fully explorable, walkable routes. So we start with sort of research, a lot of research of the maps. It wasn't just the maps, hundreds of notebooks where he kind of took all the data he'd gathered in the creation of the maps. He went on these police walks, which track the route of certain policemen, policewomen on their kind of routes. And so what we've done is built a large section of London in 3 dimensions, and then superimpose the color coding. So as you walk through our Victorian London, you simply look at the pavement and you can see Booth's color coding and get a sense of the kind of the wealth of the area at the time, but also populate that world with many of the characters that he spoke to. So the people he conducted interviews with, surveys, you can speak to them, you can conduct your own surveys, you can walk with the policeman on the kind of police walks that he did. And a lot of the kind of qualitative data that he built during the survey is accessible through these games, through these activities and sort of quests that you accomplish. Yeah, I think this is just a little flyover of that. So the project's not out yet, but hopefully later this year. And I think for the first time, LSE are thinking we could share this with a much younger audience. You know, the Booth maps, so architects love them, but because they're beautiful maps, but beyond that, they don't get much attention. And this is a way of really taking a landmark piece of urban research and making it quite accessible. So gamifying practice. This is all about how video games can augment or improve existing architectural processes. And there are so many ways of doing this, but today I really want to focus on participatory design and community consultation. And this is where Block by Block comes in. So this is the non-profit that I chair. And we're really a partnership between the UN and Microsoft, who own Minecraft. And the idea is to help communities literally redesign their cities, their public spaces, and use Minecraft as the platform for that design process. If you haven't, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of Minecraft, but just a very quick introduction. It's the most successful video game in history, a huge kind of YouTube following, 1 trillion views for every young person playing Minecraft, 2 are just watching videos of it. So it has this huge kind of cultural phenomenon. Nearly 500 million users worldwide. I would argue that the amount of kind of digital environments and worlds being created in Minecraft far exceeds any other platform. If you think about 480 million users all building their own worlds, the sheer volume of that virtual space is quite difficult to comprehend, especially when you think Minecraft worlds are infinitely generating and all unique as well. So that's for another day. I think our argument is that really Notch, who built Minecraft, it isn't just a game. He's tricked millions of people into learning CAD. That's what Minecraft is. It's essentially a simple computer-aided design tool. It's a world made up of these blocks, and you place the blocks or you remove the blocks, and that's it. There are narrative layers on top of it, but that's the basis of it. And so with that basis, we created a methodology to use it in part of urban planning consultation. The first project was in Nairobi in 2012. Since then, it's been rolled out at scale. So 2.7 million people live within a 10-minute walk of a public space that was designed in Minecraft by the community that lives there in 150 cities and 55 countries. The basic methodology is identifying this, you know, a public space or a space that would really improve the lives of people who live nearby, modeling that space in Minecraft, running a workshop, usually 1, 2, maybe 3 days, where that community redesigns that space or builds on top of the existing digital model. They then present their Minecraft builds not just to each other, but the stakeholders, the people in the government or local planning authorities. Architects then take those Minecraft builds and transpose them to plausible architectural plans, and then the public spaces are funded and built in the real world. So it moves beyond consultation into actual implementation. I mean, there are many reasons why we're using Minecraft. I mean, it started as a chance conversation between someone at the UN and someone at Mojang, the creators of Minecraft. But the more we ran the workshops, the more we realized it's surprisingly effective for this, more effective than tools which are built for the purpose. So when we play games, we enter into what's called a magic circle. The normal rules and reality of our world are suspended, and it creates a space of possibility, of opportunity that is less threatening, maybe, less risky. People are more willing to share their ideas in these game spaces, which have a level of sort of abstraction, which typical consultation processes, sort of drawing, mapping, maybe doesn't have. Some people come to us and say, well, you should really be using serious games. This is the field of games which have been designed for a specific purpose. So let's say a group of researchers at Cambridge say, we need to design a video game that will engage people in urban planning. You can do that and it might achieve the task very well. But there's a reason why Minecraft is played by 500 million people. It's super fun, and it already has built up this name that attracts young people into the consultation process. And I think youth is particularly a difficult demographic to engage. And simply saying that we running Minecraft in these workshops brings in a whole audience that otherwise just simply wouldn't engage with these processes. I think the collaborative element as well. So the idea, we build on these Minecraft servers, you have multiple users in the same space at the same time, and that forces a dialogue, a conversation. I can't do anything in my world that doesn't affect other people. And so I can't just go ahead with my own ideas without the considerations of the other avatars in that world. And then finally, the first person perspective is really important and not often considered. But architects are quite used to designing. If you use CAD, you have a God view, you're looking down. If you're drawing plan drawings, you have to learn that kind of sense of scale and perspective, but it's not intuitive at all. For someone who hasn't studied architecture, using a CAD drawing, they have no sense of scale really, or what these spaces might look like when they're actually built. Everything you do in Minecraft is from the perspective of your character. If I'm in the game, I am a character. If I want to build a wall, I go up to where the wall is and I have to place the bricks down. And so that means I'm designing a space literally as I'm in it. And that seems to be far more intuitive and useful as a tool for non-professionals. And so we're starting to sort of rebalance or level the playing fields between the professional and non-professional in these processes. I mean, loads of projects that have sort of stuck in our minds. I mean, I think it's worth noting almost all these projects are in the Global South, and that's partly UN Habitat's remit and the fact that the demand for public space is much greater there. But I think we've also seen this kind of cultural difference between planning approaches. There's definitely been a resistance. If we try and do this project in, let's say, the UK, I don't know whether it's the sort of ego of the architect or the reluctance of planning authorities to use a process which gives quite so much agency to sort of citizens is something we've noticed. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but running this project at such a large scale, we can start to identify quite interesting cultural contrasts about how this tool is used. I mean, some common themes that have emerged. We've done a lot of projects in challenging contexts, the Gaza Strip, Myanmar, where they have a civil war, Kosovo, really like war-torn communities, essentially. And we noticed that Minecraft it becomes a common language that dissolves a lot of the tensions you'd expect to see in that kind of situation, which is, yeah, it's nice because, I mean, so many games are about kind of war and conflict. It's nice to have a game that is peace building to a certain extent. The sense of ownership that users have going through this process is invaluable. If young people feel like they've had a hand in the design of a space or part of their city, they're so much more likely to be part of the life of that space and its maintenance and feel like they have a say. And that leads to this. I mean, the game is an important tool, but more important than that, and more important than the actual public spaces, the individuals who've been through the process. And time and time again, we get people who, for the first time, they say, maybe I want to be an architect. I never dreamt I could be an architect or a planner or change anything about the city that I live in. And for the first time through using this platform, the possibility of that is kind of given to them, and it's sort of an empowering thing. Now, as a contrast to this is a really interesting project that Zaha Hadid released at the end of last year in partnership with Fortnite, which is kind of similar to Minecraft. It's a world building game. And I'll play you the video. We can talk a bit about it. They have a super high definition model of London, and then they cleared parts of London and invited players to redesign it. It's quite similar to block by block in the sense that you're saying you can reshape your city using our game. The interesting thing is, as you'll see, no matter what you do, your design will look like a Zaha Hadid building. So they program these modules, which means it's impossible to escape the parametric universe of Zaha Hadid. And I'm not knocking it because it's a fantastic technological achievement. I mean, just that, within 10 seconds, these blocks are all reacting and intersecting and making interesting forms. That is phenomenal. And also, Zaha Hadid are really the first architecture firm that's really moving into the game space in a big way. So I don't want to knock that either. But maybe a challenge to you is that we need a diversity of architectural approaches and styles in these virtual worlds, because there is a risk that if you get one firm really pushing, that these kinds of virtual spaces can become quite flat and almost monopolized in how they're designed. So that's an interesting project. And then finally, I wanted to talk about digital destinations. So should architects be involved in the design of worlds that exist solely in the digital realm, that aren't about planning or shaping parts of London, but their own projects in their own right? And for this, I want to talk about a project we worked on 5 years ago now, called the Uncensored Library. It was for Reporters Without Borders, which is a non-profit that champions kind of free speech and the freedom of the press. And the challenge they gave to us was, you have millions of young people without access to free information in regimes and countries around the world. How could we bypass, to some extent, that censorship, whilst also starting a broader conversation about this topic? And the solution was this, the Uncensored Library. So in these countries where certain journalists or freedom of journalism is banned, you can still play Minecraft. And in Minecraft, you can read books. So we essentially took illegal censored articles, put them into books in Minecraft, built a huge library around it, and then players in Russia, in China, in Vietnam, who couldn't otherwise access that censored material, was able to do so. So it's essentially a Trojan horse for press information using Minecraft as the vehicle. And it's a fully functioning library. So in the middle, you have this huge dome where you have information about press censorship in all countries of the world. And then we built these kind of special wings, which really go in detail on some of, let's say, the worst offenders of press censorship. Each sort of room or wing of the library has sort of a sculpture or a unique design that reflects the press freedom situation in that country. In Saudi Arabia, we have this huge cage, which talks to the risk of imprisonment that journalists face. In Vietnam, you have this maze, which how the government obfuscates the truth, and it's quite difficult often to find kind of quality journalism in certain countries. And then in the center of all of these, you have the actual books. You have the writings of Jamal Khashoggi. You have writings of murdered, imprisoned, or exiled journalists being made accessible, arguably for the first time in these countries where they're otherwise banned. This is where we're also kind of leaning on the kind of pop culture nature of video games to share this message. So working with marketing agencies to create these campaigns. Minecraft content goes crazy on social media platforms. And so this was a really useful tool for us to kind of spread the message, not just to people who play Minecraft, but even if you didn't play Minecraft, you can log onto the website, understand the project, explore some of the 3D models to some extent. And so this was quite important. The project won a Peabody Award and got a lot of press. So it kind of achieved that goal. Also, I think using Minecraft allows us to have conversations to a certain extent. The library is an online server that you can go and explore with other people. And so we start to see conversations between young people coming from Hong Kong and America and all these places actually discussing in real time what their own experiences of press censorship are. So it becomes a bit of a forum for debate and discussion. I mean, some of the key sort of statistics, it's been visited, I mean, these numbers are a bit out of date. It's been visited over 1.1 million times. 8.2 million articles have been read in the library, so that's 4,500 every day for the last 5 years. And the average user spent over half an hour in the library, which a lot of these digital projects, people log in and they log out, but actually the fact that we're able to retain someone's interest in a project which is on quite a serious topic is quite good. I should probably talk about the architectural process behind designing this because I'm here and I don't normally talk about this, but that little kind of napkin sketch was the only plan made, basically. The way that at least me and my team build in Minecraft is sort of like how medieval cathedrals were built, in that you have a master builder who has a sort of rough idea in their head, and then everyone else is following a general scheme, but essentially improvising and responding in real time. So it's not like, here's the plan, everyone build. It's more of an intuitive, it's difficult to describe. It's like designing in conversation, rather than kind of a process of someone working on one part, passing that to another. And I think architectural processes today can look a bit like a factory. This is maybe a bit more of an intuitive, collaborative way where you're all shaping the building in real time in the same virtual space, which I think is quite interesting. I think also the architectural references as well. This was a reference I learned about here. Etienne Louis Boulet is a sort of French paper architect. These magnificent structures which could never possibly be built in the real world, video games are just the perfect medium for, because we can build to a scale where clouds form in the dome of a roof. We don't worry about sort of budgets and materials and structural engineering and fire escapes. All of these possibilities are made possible virtually. And then I think finally the politics and governance of these virtual worlds is very interesting. If you play most of these games, knowingly or unknowingly, you tick a box or you agree to a set of rules designed by the platform. So when I play Minecraft, I'm subscribing to Microsoft's terms of use. And those terms of use dictate actually what I can and can't build in that space. They don't let us build anything that has representations of countries, flags, religious buildings, anything that would flag their kind of geopolitical sensitivity is banned. So the uncensored library goes against almost all of those things. So this is sort of the digital equivalent of an illegal development. There was no planning permission for this. And it was a calculated risk that a project about censorship, if Microsoft asked us to take it down, would reflect badly on them. And we sort of got away with it. But I think the point here is that there is a potential flattening of virtual space. The censorship of the possibilities, the design possibilities of these spaces needs to be carefully monitored, because these spaces are monopolies. They are dominated by 2 or 3 technology companies. And we think that these sort of infinite digital playgrounds are where anything can happen. And the truth is not quite that. So I would sort of challenge us as architects that we need to sort of question that and do projects like this, do projects even like Total Refusal and their Jane Walk that start to kind of reclaim the medium of video games from solely sort of corporate interests. So just to end, maybe some predictions on where this is heading. I think we will see an increased overlap between video game and architectural industries. Architects offering their services to game studios. They already do this, especially architectural historians, and vice versa. The video game software is being used by architecture firms. We already see this quite a lot. Perhaps specialized units within firms who are focused on creating game spaces, essentially architects who only work on digital projects. I think this already exists. Secondly, crowdsourced architecture. So something like block by block, but at a massive scale. You could have mass participation in the design of cities and public realm projects, truly participatory approaches to consultation rather than sort of top-down box-ticking consultation. Potentially gamified digital twins. So could video games be an environment for the public to explore the huge reserves of data that local governments and cities have on their citizens and their cities? Could you log into a video game and see in real time the traffic and the population data, the quality, air quality in your city? that's a technological possibility and could be an interesting way of maybe freeing some of this data from, again, sort of quite corporate or top-down usages. Yeah, I mean, my final argument is this, really. I think in the past, video games have been designed by video game designers. And that makes sense because these spaces are not simulations. They are simulacra. They are imitations of the real world that miss the vast majority of its complexity. But we are really moving away from that. We are moving towards digital environments which are true simulation in their graphical complexity, in the range of things that you can do in those spaces. A game like Minecraft, although it's very simple, does demonstrate the potential for community action, for social interaction, meaningful existence in a virtual realm. And who better to kind of assist in the design of those complex virtual environments than architects? And I'd argue architects to some extent have a responsibility to do so. I think if left out of the conversation, these spaces which are becoming more frequently used and part of our daily lives, having them designed solely by software engineers and game developers, it's quite a scary prospect. Yeah, I'll leave it there.